Introducing the right-wing war on education, starring Betsy DeVos, evangelical Christians, and a few dudes who rented out strip malls, called themselves schools, and stole your public school tax dollars.
And on the third day, God created the Remington bolt-action rifle so that man could fight the dinosaurs and the homosexuals. Amen.
In this hour, we'll talk about how Republicans want to dumb our kids down and what we have to do to stop them. As always, leading the conversation is Patti Vasquez. But with her, we have Kirk Bangstead of the Minocqua Brewing Company, who is leading the charge to get rid of the parasitic voucher school system in Wisconsin. And a few fellow public education warriors he brought along to educate us. The right-wing war on education is brought to you by the Minocqua Brewing Company. Take it away, Patti.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us for the Minocqua Brewing Company sponsored right-wing war on public education. Joining me as the co-host for these segments is Kirk Bangstead. Kirk, I've gotten messages from folks who are telling me that they are really learning a lot from these conversations. So I want to, first of all, thank you so much for highlighting this, for making sure that people are aware of how destructive this is for our future, for kids and families.
Yeah, so the point of these shows is that you can't just sue to get rid of the Wisconsin school voucher system in a vacuum, because the lobby, the school choice lobby, is so powerful and has so much money that they can convince people that we're somehow doing something bad when in actuality we're trying to do something really good. And so the reason we're having these weekly shows, both on the Minocqua Brewing Company Facebook page and in Minneapolis and Chicago, is to make sure that people understand and we demystify the term school choice. It really doesn't mean some sort of a panacea of education. It means we're actually hurting public schools throughout the state of Wisconsin. So the first thing we're going to talk about today, before we even introduce our guests, we have a really great update for everybody. The Supreme Court of Wisconsin just sent an order to the plaintiffs, in this case, us, and the defendants, which is Robin Voss, the Department of Public Instruction, and the Wisconsin Department of Administration. And they ordered all of us to send in arguments to convince them to take this case immediately. That means, they could have rejected this case outright and said, you have to do it the old-fashioned way, which is to take it in a small court first and then win there or lose there and appeal. But we went straight to the Supreme Court because we think it's that important to Wisconsin to end what's going on here. And so by asking us to actually submit arguments, it means that they are at least willing to entertain to take this case, which means that if we can, it's going to probably skip an entire year of litigation if they take this case right away. So this is really good, really good.
Because the harm is ongoing. This isn't something like, down the road it could be harmful. It's ongoing.
Kids, they don't get their 9 year. They don't turn 9 years old again and again and again. They don't get their educations back if they get a bad one. So with that, I wanted to introduce. We have a really special show today. We've been talking about voucher schools in Wisconsin from every single angle. We talked about the history of voucher schools in Wisconsin. We talked about the history of them in the United States. We talked about our voucher lawsuit. We talked about how disabled kids are specifically hurt worse with voucher schools. We've done this every way, but tonight's show may be the most important one because we're going to specifically talk about how the voucher school program hurts the Milwaukee Public Schools, and the reason this is like the heart of the voucher school problem in Wisconsin, because it started in Milwaukee 30 years ago.
But Kirk, everyone says that you're being racist because you don't want to help children of color by trying to dismantle the voucher system.
Well, I think,
but we're going to learn differently.
We just wrote an op-ed about that today. We've been accused of that. It's weird you say that because our guests are both women of color, but I didn't really want to talk about race today. I wanted to talk about Milwaukee, more importantly. Yeah. But I'll let them get into that if they want to. But let's introduce them now. We have two wonderful guests today who just are pivotal in this discussion of Milwaukee Public Schools and the voucher system there. So first we have Marva Herndon, and she was elected to the Milwaukee Public School Board in 2019, and she now serves as the president of that board. Marva has had a career with Harley-Davidson as a computer programmer, and all her children and grandchildren have graduated from or are currently enrolled in the Milwaukee Public School System. She herself graduated from West Division High School. Marva is active in many other community groups, including the NAACP and Women Informed. She is on the board for Wisconsin Alliance for Excellent Schools, and she is truly a leader in the community. So Marva, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Great. And then our other guest is Ingrid Walker Henry, and she is the Vice President of the Milwaukee Teacher Education Association. It's the teachers union in Milwaukee, and she's a member of Schools and Communities United. Ingrid, thanks so much for also joining us.
Thank you.
Hello, hello.
Right. So because Patti brought it up first, well, actually, I wanted to ask Marva. I mean, we got you through as a guest through our great friend Julie Underwood, who's a plaintiff in our case, and she has told me a little bit about your history. She said that you were opposed to the Milwaukee Voucher program when it was first introduced to Milwaukee over 30 years ago. Can you talk about why you're interested in education in the first place? What has caused you to be an advocate for Milwaukee Public Schools, and and what keeps you fighting the voucher program?
Thanks for asking those questions. I am a real advocate of public education because I come from a family of educators on both sides. Although I chose not to go into education as a profession, I support it wholeheartedly. And in that I'm a graduate of Milwaukee Public Schools myself, I know the great education that I and my classmates and everybody I could think of from that era, the type of education that we all received. And during those years, those early years of Milwaukee Public Schools, there was not an issue about funding. And when the school choice program started early on, it was not supposed to impact funding as the way it does today. I actually got to know the woman that started it, and she did not intend for it to end this way. Her goal was merely to, for the poorest of the poor in the city of Milwaukee to have an opportunity to go to what we now know as a voucher school, which typically are schools that can teach religion, but that they would have an opportunity to do so. And on a very small scale, which the statistics show that. By the time the last several years prior to her death, that was far from the case, and she disavowed it. And in so doing, she joined forces with we advocates up until her death that were fighting against school choice as it exists at that time and today.
I was just looking at the numbers as far as like when this started, because in the 1990 to 91 school year, 6 schools were serving 258 students and were enrolled in the MPCP, and the program was costing $733,800. Now the program is estimated to cost let's just say not $295 million. Otherwise, I'm going to do all those numbers, and it's all going to be crazy. So tell us a little about that data and how it's exploded like this, and that has to have such an incredibly negative impact on the entire system.
It absolutely does. And what got me started so strongly in the fight against school choice was from the very beginning. It was more or less a quiet, activity, but then by 2008, 2009, it started being advertised as the cure-all for education, and Milwaukee was always the specific target. And the first thing policy-wise, was the mayoral takeover. And I was absolutely, totally against that, because when you change the person at the top, everyone comes in with a different agenda. And at that time, Chicago was dealing with that different agenda when Rahm Emanuel, shortly thereafter, or sometime during that time, took over the District of Chicago and started to shut it down.
Yep.
So, so that made me get out there even more forcefully. And the more I actually did a lot of research. I don't get to do that these days as board president, but I spent all these years in the interim, right up through till I was elected to the school board. I was doing research, and I was researching the impact on Milwaukee Public Schools, and why was it such an attractive thing for these people all over the country to promote it. And one of the biggest things I learned was that it was financial. It was a mindset throughout the country for a certain segment that schools should be operated like a business. And in doing so, it could be a profitable entity, a profitable venture. And on the story goes. Wall Street got involved. The mega billionaires, such as the one guy that owns Netflix, for example, are highly active in it right until this day. Also, we had people come, yes, we also had people come into Milwaukee, such as Andre Agassi, the pro tennis player. And if they would open schools, and if they weren't profitable, they shut them down. That's where the negativity and the detrimental effects of it comes in. And I will leave it at that as you conversate further.
Wow. We'll get more into it for sure, but I wanted to make sure we brought Ingrid into the conversation. Ingrid, you've been a public school teacher. Now you're vice president of the Teachers Union. What motivates what motivates your union activism, and especially what motivated you to join our show tonight and talk about how the voucher schools are hurting the Milwaukee Public Schools?
Well, I'm going to start with this. I am still definitely a teacher, even though I am vice president of MTEA. It's something that is just in my family. It's in my blood. My mom was an MPS teacher. My aunt was an MPS teacher. They both retired. I like to tell people that I think my mom had me at an apprenticeship at about the age of 8. So I am probably one of the few 8-year-olds in the world that could close down and open up a classroom and put up the bulletin boards. Also chaperoning too, but just teaching is always, being a teacher is something that I will always be and do, and I do love. Union activism, what started me? My motivation is my son, my niece, my nephew, my cousins, who are all products. They're in MPS or they're graduates of Milwaukee Public Schools, and even after graduation are benefiting from some of the programs that are offered. But what got me started is actually Act 10, Scott Walker. Up until that point, I had been teaching for about 10 years or so. And honestly, my biggest thing was, what can I do in the school? What field trips are we going on? How can I get a few more art supplies? And then there's this thing that happens, and you see it on social media, and you start wondering, what is this about? How is this impacting me? And until that point, honestly, I hadn't thought about how I played into my union. It was something that I didn't have to think about, and I took it for granted. And then all of a sudden, something is being taken away, and you have to start asking why and what is that about? And after spending some trips, some of them very, very cold, at the Capitol with a lot of friends across the state of Wisconsin, I realized that being in the union is a special thing because I'm not alone in this advocacy work, in fighting for students and fighting for families and fighting for what's better. And that if we aren't the ones doing it, who is?
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. And I'm excited to have you on the show because so often from the right, we hear that teachers union leaders, they're demonized. And so having you on the show shows that you're a teacher who cares about kids, who's never gotten in this for the money. No teacher gets into it for the money. You're a regular person. They've demonized the teachers unions as people wwho are indoctrinating our kids in some weird way, and obviously that's just not the case. So I appreciate you being on so that people can see that there's nice teachers union folks that are advocating for kids here. So
and I have to say, Kirk, I have met several fierce warriors who were created by Scott Walker. And not created. You were there the whole time. He just he activated a lot of really incredible folks.
A lot of great people.
Absolutely.
So Marva, you started talking about the history of the voucher school program. You were there when it started. You said that the engineers of the actual program, couldn't believe what it turned out to be. Can you talk about what you've seen over 30 years and how it's chipped away at the public school system in Milwaukee?
Well, for example, as an MPS student myself, we had everything possible that we needed, the best of everything. And what I began to see when my own children started school, number one was busing occurred. And with the busing, that destroyed that closeness, that family in the community to this day. It does not really exist because of the buses going all over the city everywhere. There's no sense of belonging, no sense of community. We didn't have to beg the state for funding. Ultimately, what happened though with this program was I realized that the district was being defunded. And the more I got into my research, the more upset I got. And I've never stopped fighting till this day. And as I said it earlier, it was profitable. How did it impact the public school district? Was the fact that I began to see curricula be removed. I began to see families gravitating to the choice schools, vouchers and charters. And as they left the district, they carried that funding with them. On the other hand, as I stated, around 2009 with the mayoral takeover, and then 2010, as Ingrid mentioned with Scott Walker, this whole thing like snowballed and got far worse. In the schools, the programming was removed. Things that entice students to attend school on a daily basis, such as having band, music, art, FIAD, even football teams, even marching bands, all of that slowly but surely disappeared. And as that disappeared, of course, our district was blamed for it. So the end result was that we were defunded by the state systematically over and over again, but yet we were compared to the choice program schools when our schools, the performance levels, the test scores, all of that began to diminish. Then we were held up, oh, we need to shut them down. We need to take the buildings. We need to fire all the teachers because they can't teach, and on the story goes. So the more, the number of years went by, many in the African American community began to really believe that messaging. And for me, as a just John Q citizen, I was very upset by that. So that's how I started Women Committed to an Informed Community. And it was just the two of us initially. My close friend, Gail Hicks, who's a retired special education teacher of MPS. And we took to the streets, we took to the airwaves. Because I'm a computer programmer, I certainly know my way around a computer, right? So we were a perfect match. And I started to harass DPI for information on anything I needed. And they were always very, very helpful. And we just basically had a traveling roadshow. And we had all kinds of nicknames to go with it. And I met Ingrid during that time. She came to one of our traveling road shows out in the neighborhood. And we were presenting seminars, and I set up PowerPoints, the whole thing. We did seminars on how the funding really, really worked and how owners of the charter schools really operated financially, with all the technical stuff going with it. And I never quit until I got on the board and just couldn't handle that workload.
It is so heartbreaking when you hear about the difference between, you mentioned even like the idea of programs like sports and arts that entice kids to go to school. Like sometimes you just gut it out so you can play basketball at the end of the day, whatever. I mean, that's how I was as a kid. And so I want to ask Ingrid, what have you seen as the negative impact as this voucher program continues to impact the public schools in Milwaukee?
No, I'm a lot like Marva, where I went through the Milwaukee public school systems, and then on the other side of it, which she doesn't have that, but as a teacher and having a span of probably over 30 years within the system, knowing that when I started at Townsend Elementary, we had art, music, physical education, library, and you had a choice. You could take either Spanish, German, or French. That cannot be said about students in Milwaukee Public Schools now. The opportunities that used to be there for students have dwindled. And I'm proud to say that MTEA members have done a really great job of getting art and music back into our schools, but it's a fight, and it's a fight that should never have happened. That underfunding, the cutting of the budget, and schools and districts having to make the choice of, do we have a band and orchestra? Do we have the foreign language offerings? And scaling it all the way back to thinking about No Child Left Behind, and just it's reading, writing, and math. And those are the only things important. And any educator, any parent can tell you that a child is way more than a test score, and they are way more than what they can do in reading, writing, and math. So it's really heartbreaking to know that, and to have seen the opportunities that students don't have that they should.
So I think it bears repeating for our audience that this is seemingly a strategic way to break the back of public schools. If you systematically defund public schools, and they have to take away the things that kids love about them. I wouldn't have gotten through high school without music at all. I mean, I was a professional musician for 10 years of my life. I wouldn't have gone to class probably. So if you systematically defund public education, so you take away the things that kids love, then they start performing worse in schools, and then you have a reason as a politician to say, well, see, I told you so. They were bad, and now they're bad, and we should stop them. So it's psychological, and it's a way to keep on pounding. If you keep, it's what they've done to government as well. If you don't actually fund roads and there's potholes all over the place, and you can say, well, government is bad. We shouldn't even have government, or we should not tax people because government knows what to do with our taxes. So it's this constant, and it's all from the right wing, to kill our institutions, to kill the public schools, that kills people's belief that government can be good, and it's not real. Voucher schools, if they're funded at twice as much, obviously you're going to be able to offer more programs. So it's a false choice that if something is bad, defund it. So I just wanted to emphasize that, because that's
make it worse.
It's a scheme, not a reality.
I want to thank our guests. We're going to take a break here. We are talking to Ingrid Walker Henry and Marva Herndon, co-hosting with Kirk Bangstad as we continue our weekly segments on the right-wing war on education. More after this on WCPT 820 Heartland Signal and KTNF 950 AM Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Won't you let me die?
And now back to the right-wing war on education.
We are continuing our conversation, the right-wing war on education, sponsored by Minocqua Brewing Company, and our co-host Kirk Bangstad, who is bringing a lawsuit against the state of Wisconsin, going all the way to the Supreme Court. Every week we are talking about experts and the people who are fighting this fight on the ground, making sure that kids have access to public education. Joining us are Ingrid Walker Henry and Marva Herndon. And I know that, one of the things that anybody who says, we shouldn't have, the voucher system, no one is saying that families shouldn't have a choice of sending their kids to different schools. They want to send them to parochial schools, to religious, whatever they want to do. That we're not saying that. What we're saying is it shouldn't come at the expense of our public schools. And Marva, a lot of people, and Ingrid, I don't know, whoever wants to, if you want to join, jump in on this. One of the things that people like me get accused of is that, well, we don't want to make sure that kids of color, many kids who or poor kids don't have a choice, can't go to the nicer schools or the parochial schools. What are your thoughts on that when you hear those arguments? Marva?
I'm totally offended by it. MPS even now has excellent schools. The biggest problem with any public school district throughout the country is the societal ills that come through the school doors, and the fact that public education has been defunded. So there's not a lot of energy to go through the door because of what's missing once you get in there. So that's not the case. What I'm offended by is that prior to my becoming a board director and doing my research and traveling road shows and that whole thing, I was offended by companies, the billionaires coming into the city, opening a charter school or a voucher school and offering people in my community $20 gas cards, a hot dog and a bag of chips, and a free uniform. And that was the selling pitch that was continuously used, and Ingrid can speak upon that as well. Totally offensive. Another one instance I found offensive was one of the national organizations. It happened a number of years ago, but they happen to still be open as a charter school. And they came into the city and they were going to build a new building. So there was a community meeting that my alderman held, and he, being a tradesman, wanted to know, and many of us did in the community, would jobs be offered if they were to build this building for a new charter school? The answer was no. We're bringing our own team, and they were out of Michigan, I think. They were bringing their own team in, and the community just had a fit. But they built the building the way they wanted to build it, and local tradespeople were not involved. I find that totally offensive, and I consider it racist.
So I want to follow up on that with Ingrid. To me, if you're taking the funds away from public schools in cities like Milwaukee and Racine, who in Wisconsin has got a way higher percentage of people of color in those cities than in the rest of the state, to me, that's actually. To me, that's hurting minorities because you're defunding the public schools. I would reverse that argument. It's not like you're taking away opportunities for minorities to get to a private school. You're actually hurting the opportunities of the current folks that are going into that are into public school by defunding the schools. Ingrid, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, what's happened is over time, and it's exactly what you said about the roads. The message has been that there's something wrong with public education, or that, it's not working and we have to get rid of it. And you've had that permeating the airwaves for decades at this point. And so you have people who will look at it and say, you know what, they must be right. They've been saying this, or someone's been saying this over and over, and I'm going to use this school choice voucher. I'm going to do this other thing. And no one talks about, or no one has looked at the fact that until very recently, school choice wasn't available anywhere else but Milwaukee. Milwaukee is a city. It's a city that is made up mostly of Black and brown residents. And for some strange reason, and I'm not even going to call this strange. At this point, I don't know if I can call it anything other than racism, but how is it that Milwaukee continuously is underfunded? How are they targeted for these scams and these things? One of the places that I actually met Marva at was an old factory that had not gone through environmental testing, but had opened as a school. And this was a factory that had dangerous chemicals in there and part of their production. And for anyone to say that that is okay, and that is something that's offered in the suburbs or offered in other places in Wisconsin, they're not telling the truth.
Don't forget about the power substation in the back of the building and the railroad tracks.
She knows exactly which building we're talking about.
Tell us that one. That sounds particularly bad. Marva.
Hope Schools, if you remember Mark Newman, I think his name is, that ran against Scott Walker. Oh, he's making money right here big time. Hope Schools, actually, Andre Agassi was the first occupant there. He didn't make enough money. That was the initial fight with Ingrid, and I met and everything. I took pictures to the city, went to the state, and said, how can you do this without doing soil testing? They said, because for non-public schools, there are no building codes. If you guys want it done, you got to cough up the money yourself to have the soil testing done. Needless to say, we were broke. We didn't have that kind of money, so it didn't happen. It's still a school today, and Mark Newman's network of Hope School, his family's schools are in that building at the current time. And I can repeat that story over and over throughout the city. And even Hope Schools themselves just closed, 2 schools, Ingrid, in the past year?
Yeah, I believe so.
And these are these are voucher schools?
Yes.
Okay, so tell us, this leads directly to the follow-up question. So if these schools close because they're not profitable, these voucher schools, but you've already, and we've shown,
charters.
And charters. And by the way, in our lawsuit, we didn't do the numbers in Milwaukee, but we did the numbers in Madison. For every kid that takes a voucher in Madison and leaves the public school, it's worth the cost of 5 students' education in the public schools in Madison. So it's a 5 times as much of a hit when you take it out. I'm guessing it's something similar in Milwaukee. So what happened?
Could I quickly share something with you before we forget it?
Yeah.
It's even worse for special needs students because they are not compelled to educate special needs students. So if they have a student that requires too much care or services, they'll get the students, hold them until 3rd Friday, and kick them back to the district. And we are always required to service their students in the first place. But as of today, as of this budget that was just passed, we still only get reimbursed at approximately 30%. compared to the vouchers and charters now with the new budget being reimbursed at like 95%. I just wanted to share that quickly.
Yeah. And so when these kids, when a charter school or a voucher school closes because they decide, they're not making enough money, or when they send a kid with special needs back to the public school, I mean, obviously that's disruptive to that kid. I mean, what happens to these kids who have kind of made friends or, in a different kind of system and they're bounced back? How does that affect them? And maybe that's a question for Ingrid, because you probably teach some of them.
Well, I'm actually going to give you a story about a voucher that closed, the Brew Troopers, and it was a voucher that focused on military training for children. And we received a student, and it was first grade. So we get him in first grade. And the teacher came to me and said, I'm really concerned. He's really struggling with reading. There's a lot of things he doesn't know. And I said, hey, why don't we pull up his records from his previous school and find out, what the previous teacher documented. Well, it took a while, a very long time to get the record, or a folder with information. When we finally did receive the information, the only thing in there was records that said the student was repeatedly, as a K-5, by the way, please remember, a K-5, a 5-year-old, was repeatedly sent home for not having their uniform, something that a 5-year-old has absolutely no control over. And so now we receive this child, I would say midway through first grade, and there's a lot of things that the child needs to be successful. We actually talked to mom and discussed, like, it's not his fault. It's not your fault. He didn't get what he needed. And she actually agreed to have him repeat the first grade. And I'm actually happy in this situation, because even though it is something that was detrimental, this child had to suffer in respects to repeat a grade because adults had not done their job. The good thing was he actually thrived and he became a leader, and just like his reading and everything exploded, but it should have never happened. Those are the things. And then we're talking about students that are taken into these schools, maybe because their parents are offered, like Marva was saying, a gas card, or now with a little more budget money, iPads, I've heard as well. And when the school is to the point of Third Friday, which is the date that the state sets for funding, they keep them until a little bit after that and then say, you know what, we can't meet your needs. And they send them back to public schools without the money. And it is our pleasure, it is our duty, it is our responsibility to educate the students, but it shouldn't be in this fashion. It shouldn't be without the resources that they need.
Wow. I we're all trying to wrap our minds around a military school for kindergartners.
Yeah.
Okay. Marva, tell us a little bit about how the expansion of voucher schools affect communities. You talked a little bit about the public schools and busing and disconnecting people from their communities. How has the voucher program impacted our neighborhoods and families?
In many of the neighborhoods, there's tons of voucher schools. And part of what our state policymakers did was create all of this legislation where they could take our buildings. So there was a move on trying to take our buildings. And one of my tours, I took a tour. I was testifying in Madison. I'll take you back to that. I was testifying in Madison against one of these takeover moves that they were making or whatever. And I challenged our legislators to come to Milwaukee because they were getting this rosy story about how great school choice was going in Milwaukee. And this is back 2012, 2014, in that year range. And nobody took me up on it except Mandy Wright, who was a state representative at that time. And so we ended up doing the tour with Ruth Conant from Progressive Magazine at that particular time. And they were just appalled. They were appalled at what it did. These parents are sacrificing these children attending school in storefronts, ice cream stores. We talked about the steel factory a few moments ago. And then eventually they go out of it. Some of them go out of business and they come back to Milwaukee Public Schools in a situation such as Ingrid just described. That's repeated over and over and over and over. And I most recently had an incident where this 5-year-old, again, Ingrid, was in one of the voucher schools, and it turns out he has seizures. This just happened within this year. And I happen to be a contact for many in the community under those circumstances because they remember my traveling shows. And I was contacted, and they forcefully put the child out of their school at the end of the school year because the parent was fighting to keep him there. And I was able to satisfy them, and now they're happy campers. The child is doing better. His health has improved. The parent recently told me that the doctors are even considering reducing medication. These are the types of things that happen, and everybody doesn't have the opportunity to get with a Marva or Ingrid to help them manage that.
So we talked about what voucher schools have done to the public school system. We're talking about the negative impact of voucher schools to communities within Milwaukee. Ingrid, the following question. Obviously, we had a whole hour about this weeks ago with other folks in the teachers union. But what is the expansion of the voucher program in Milwaukee doing to teachers, to public school teachers? What has been the effect of hiring, retaining, the entire environment surrounding teachers?
Well, when you spend decades tearing down a profession, it's hard to all of a sudden turn on a dime and try to rebuild that profession. So whereas when I was going into the School of Education, I was looking at schools in other states, and my mom says, well, if you're going to be a teacher, you need to be in Wisconsin. Like, we are leaders in the field of education. I don't know if we can say that anymore. We have schools of education that have closed all across this state. There are schools that may graduate one Phi-Ed teacher a year. It's not a good situation. So when we underfund, when we demonize a profession, at some point, it's going to be hard for people to go into that profession, to think about it as a future career. It's hard to ensure that people stay. It's hard to recruit. I mean, it's a snowball effect. And what is scary is across the country at this point, you hear districts saying, we don't have enough people to teach children. And you have the opposing forces. Well, that's why school choice is great. We can't keep going like this. It's harming children.
It just appalls me because, that this is a strategic thing that they're doing on the right. Because when the rubber hits the road, 99% of the teachers you meet are some of the most awesome people you're going to meet in your life. Their hearts are big, their smiles are big, and to demonize this profession is just not. It's inherently untrue and is inherently dishonest. But yes, not starting with Scott Walker, but enhanced with Scott Walker 10 years ago. My sister's a college professor. I had to defend my sister in a bar when somebody said that she was getting paid too much, when she was making the equivalent of a Starbucks worker for how many hours she put in, to grade papers and to plan curricula. And I just couldn't believe that that people actually wake up every morning because they've heard conservative AM talk radio. They wake up every morning and they actually think that teachers are anything but awesome people. It just sickens me that this is a strategy and a purposely undermining of a profession that we need desperately to even the playing field for kids.
Public education is a public good, and we have to start acting like it, and we have to invest in it like it is.
Sorry, I'm writing that down. So I remember public education is a public good. Keep saying it over and over again, folks. Go ahead, Kirk.
So we've got about 8 minutes left to the show, and I always want to move to how we can fix things. So we've talked about. I mean, we've really kind of delved into all the negatives, but the goal of this is to turn it around. So Marva, let's start with you. What can folks in Milwaukee who are listening tonight, what can they do to turn this around and support public education?
They have to first dig through the minutia that they've endured for decades at this point, and reach out to your neighbor or somebody that is involved with public schools in some way, shape, or form, be it an employee or student or parent or whatever, and really go for yourself. Our doors are open for you to visit the schools and actually review it. Go in, visit, observe. We've, in spite of everything that has been dealt to us, Milwaukee Public Schools and schools around the state are doing yeoman's work with no money, and we've got some good programs. We're striving in pinching pennies to try to do better. And if parents would just observe and as a board director, that's one of the big things that I and other board directors have pushed is communications, because in the early years, the district would share with me that they didn't want to fight back. They didn't want to create a fuss, because if we say something, the state is going to come down on us even harder. But we've got a different mindset now. And we want to show them that you join this movement, make use of our schools. It doesn't make sense for you to send your school to these other schools, and they may be here and they may not. And as this continues, we may not be here. So let's work together to maintain a system that we ourselves have control over. As a resident, as a taxpayer, as a parent, you have a voice in this district. And any public school district, you have a voice. So you must use it, because otherwise you're giving your rights away.
I can't remember. Yeah, go ahead.
You aren't calling the shots.
Yeah. And it's a lot to put on the teachers as well, because I know that a few weeks ago we had a guest who said, teachers, use your outside voices. It's time. And so it shouldn't all be on the teachers, but we do need to support what you're doing. Well, how else can we help? What's the path forward, Ingrid?
Well, it is about using our outside and our teacher voice. But I think as a community, as a state, just all of us, we have to be strong, vocal public education supporters. It's not time to hide in the shadows, or, when we hear the comment about public education is failing. No, it's not. Society as a whole, budgets have failed public education, but no, there are students who are doing great things. There's teachers doing great things, and we see them out in the world all the time. We have to vocally advocate for funding. There's a narrative that is always, there's no funding, there's no budget. We're sitting in Wisconsin. There is a huge budget surplus. There's money to fund our schools. There's going to the next point of holding our elected officials to a higher standard. Your job, you're a public official. Your job is to be that advocate, to be that fighter, to put the ideas forward, to work on getting those ideas across the line. I don't need to have another official look at me and say, oh, no one else is going to do this. No one else is going to go with it. What are we voting for then? What is the purpose of you being in that office? And I'm going to say, as a union leader, there is power in the union. There is power in us as educators being a part of our union and joining together and raising our voices and demanding better of everybody around public education.
I'm so grateful for that. And you're absolutely right. Hold them accountable. Before we go, I have to wrap this up. But Kirk, let people know what our next week segment's going to be. We've been with Ingrid Walker Henry, Marva Herndon. I apologize. Thank you so much for an incredible hour. Kirk, what's coming up next week?
We are going to move to up north. We've talked about Milwaukee, the urban problems with voucher schools. We're going to turn it around and go, what are the rural problems with voucher schools? Some of the worst deficits in school budgets are happening in rural towns like Neillsville, Eau Claire, Minocqua, where I'm from, all that stuff. So we're going to talk about the rural issues next week.
Outstanding. And thank you again. This was such an important and impactful conversation. I look forward to connecting with you both again. Let us know how we can help. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. It's been the Right Wing War on Education, sponsored by Minocqua Brewing Company. Thank you, Kirk Bankstead. And take it away from Mike Crute and the Devil's Advocates. Thank you, everybody, here at WCPT.
You're listening to the Right Wing War on Education, brought to you by the Minocqua Brewing Company.